Hey, welcome back to the Flow Tribe podcast, where I get to interview the movers, breathers, teachers, healers, and creators of the world. In this episode, I get to speak with the amazing Marisa Merliss. So, Marisa is a New York based dancer. She's a fitness instructor, she's a fitness model, but she's also a healer. And it's really the healing part that we dive into in this episode. So after years of chronic pain, Marisa eventually discovered some modalities that would allow her to not only deal with her own pain, but she eventually became an instructor in those methods, which then allowed her to help other people deal with their own chronic pain issues. So that's basically what we dive into this episode. It's all about chronic pain and how to deal with it. And yeah, this was an amazing conversation. I can't wait to share it with you. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Marisa Merliss. So Marisa, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. And what I'd like to do is have you kind of just introduce yourself, let people know who you are and a little bit about what you do.
So my name is Marisa Merliss, and I live in New York City. I work full-time in the fitness and wellness industry. One of the primary things I do is I teach the MELT method, which is a recovery technique that involves fascia rehydration and helps with alignment and unwinding compensation patterns and body mechanics. And it's just a great way to get people out of pain. I also teach barre and a method called BodyART, functional training, and Pilates. And I'm a registered nurse. I got my nursing degree in college, but I danced professionally for years and always did nursing on the side, which is what I'm still doing. I work in pediatrics in the neonatal ICU. And yeah, I still dance for fun. Thank you to the MELT method for keeping me mobile and out of pain, which is how I found it. We'll get to that in a few minutes, but yeah, that's my short story. I'm married. I have a great husband. All the good things here in
All
New
the
York.
good things. So let's go back to the beginning. So something we were just talking about before we started recording was how being a professional dancer is very comparable to being a professional athlete. And what comes with that is just a lot of wear and tear on the body, right? And so what
Yeah.
you were saying was that what really started it off for you, however, was a drop, right?
Yeah.
But
I
while
was
you were
doing a
dancing, so maybe you could fill us in a little bit on that, because I think that's kind of a big part of your story, because the chronic pain that came from that experience is what led you down the path that you're on now, right? So
for
maybe
sure.
let's start there, and you can talk a little bit about your dance career and what led you to the next steps.
Yeah, so I had been dropped doing a lift, and I had mild scoliosis growing up, but never enough to do anything about it outside of exercise. And so I was doing a cruise ship show and was dropped doing this lift. And then the thing that came up first was a foot injury. And then with limping around on the foot and trying to heal that, my back started to act up. And it just turned into this cyclical thing. It was really hard to diagnose because it was one was affecting the other. And I had some nerve damage down my leg, which caused weakness, which wasn't allowing the foot to get better. And it was just kind of getting the doctors to talk to each other so they weren't just treating two individual things was challenging. And I ended up having 6 surgeries, 3 on my foot and 3 on my back. Uh, in an attempt to try to heal from this. And I tried every other modality, acupuncture, PT, all massage, all the different things. And surgery was necessary for the things I had going on because the herniation in my back was so bad. So ultimately I had a fusion in my spine, in my L5S1. Luckily I only had to have 2 levels or 1 disc level fused. And the foot was partially reconstructed. And but I healed well from the whole thing once we finally figured out what was going on. It just took a lot of detective work and multiple doctors to finally get me the right diagnosis and the right treatment. So
And going through that process, it I'm just curious, because I think it's something that a lot of people have a hard time. I feel as soon as there's more than one doctor involved, things get complicated,
they do.
right? Because of the communication, and it's not the doctor's fault. I think it's more of it's a systemic kind of breakdown of things. But what role did you play in your own recovery, in the sense that did you have to kind of take charge of certain things? Did you have to do a lot of detective work? Because I'm
Yeah.
just curious, because I think a lot of people get frustrated, especially when they have something chronic or something more complicated, and it's really hard to get a straightforward answer. And sometimes it can be really frustrating. And I just wonder, like, how much did you have to kind of do your own work, or were things kind of going in the direction
Yeah,
you wanted?
I was constantly advocating for myself. And I just felt like, for example, with the foot misdiagnosis, like people, I can't tell you how many different pairs of orthotics I had from different doctors, and they would give them to me thinking that their orthotics are going to help me. And 4 months later, nothing's really better. And now they don't know what to do. And, but they're, some of them are too egotistical to admit that. And then I'm left to, on my own, try to figure out who to go to next. I felt like more often than not, I did have one doctor who told me he didn't know. And that was really relief, because I was like, okay, thank you for not wasting my time.
Yeah,
So
okay.
yeah, so um, I definitely was advocating for myself all the time. And, you know, I feel like when you're with the right doctor, there's a level of humility and they're willing to communicate with other doctors, even if they have their PA communicate. But I found the best doctors I worked with, like they actually, when I had my final foot surgery, which was a little controversial, and they had never done a foot surgery exactly the way they had to do mine to reconstruct my midfoot. Um, the doctor that did my surgery referred me to a doctor in Philadelphia and another one in Atlanta. And so I happened to be going to Georgia to judge a dance competition that weekend. So I saw that doctor. I drove down to Philly, saw the other doctor, and then all three doctors met on the phone and involved me in the discussion. And they were trying to come up with different plans. One didn't sound right. One sounded kind of okay. And then I made a suggestion about, you know, getting a PA in the OR to um, be an extra set of hands to do a bone graft from a part of the bone they were removing, so they didn't have to take a bone from my hip. And they were like, oh, that's a great idea, we've never done it that way, but that makes sense. So it was like I got to contribute to my surgical plan, which is something that they didn't think about, like not because they're not good at their job. I mean, they got us to like that point, but they even listened to my suggestion, and that's how they did the surgery. And that's how another part of my body didn't have to be affected and traumatized, and it was successful. So yeah, it was a lot of, I bring that all up because when you're with a good doctor, they're willing to communicate and there isn't that ego there or that desire to like be right. It's really a desire to truly help the patient in the best way that they can. So
That's really cool. The fact that you had to say. And I think people underestimate that. I think a lot of doctors can get frustrated though when people start, Google MDing their situations, because
yeah,
it can get crazy, right? Because I mean, and again, I mean, doctors, the thing is if you, when you're going through it, obviously your motivation level to get better is much higher than the doctor's motivation level to work on your case, because you're not the only person that person has to care for,
hmm,
right? And I get that. But I think what you're saying also is sometimes it's nice that a doctor at least acknowledge the idea that, hey, maybe you have something there. Maybe there is something to your ideas. I understand, the research that you're doing, and I recognize that. And I think that must be nice to
yeah.
have some sort of say. And
I think
so
I think
once you
it's
did,
different.
yeah,
I was gonna say I think it's different being like a paranoid Google MD person versus being a well researched and well thought out Google MD person.
yeah,
Like
absolutely.
and I found for myself what was most important, because I would get those like hyperventilating type moments of being anxious about like what's wrong with me, nobody can figure it out, blah blah blah. But like leaving that out of the doctor's office, because that's not something that they oftentimes doctors relate well with, and they think
Yeah.
then they'll start to think, oh, maybe it's in her head, or maybe it's, this or that. But I think the more you can stay calm, cool, and collected when dealing with doctors, and then once you leave the office, if you need to cry, go for it, but like,
Yeah.
or panic. But I found the doctors responded better to me when I just sort of like, just was very concise and very direct about
And take the
things that I
emotion
was
out of
concerned
it,
about.
right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
walk in with a list of questions, because sometimes it's hard to think on the spot, especially
Yeah.
when it's your body and your um, situation that's at stake. And so the
Well, I'm
more
also
prepared,
thinking that the fact that you're a nurse helped, right?
yeah,
Because you
definitely.
have that background, you have the ability to present medical information, you have, the ability to do the research also, which is
Hmm.
something a lot of people have a hard time with, like if just diving into scientific papers, like I have a small background in biology, but all that did really, I think, is gave me the ability to read through scientific papers and make some sense of them. As
Yeah,
where someone who doesn't have that background, it's a hard read. It's a
yeah,
hard read, and it's hard to make sense of those things. And I think that that's where you can get caught up in the the easier parts of Google MD, which are usually the sites you shouldn't be looking at in the first place,
Yeah.
right? It's a lot of folk science and stuff that, maybe you shouldn't be trusting all that much, and stuff that doctors will definitely not listen to, and I think that's where it can get a little bit tricky for people. And so once you had that successful surgery, were you then on the road to recovery and things were going well, or were you still
Well,
dealing with some repercussions of the surgeries?
you know, the foot surgery was before my last back surgery. So once that happened, it was just that I had been on crutches so many times, and that recovery was so extensive that it threw my pelvis off, which threw my back off, which caused the disc to herniate again. But after I was, I had the second and third back surgery in the same year, because I just needed a fusion, and they weren't willing to do it on me right away because I was young. I was in my mid 20s at the time, and so once I had that last back surgery, I was much more stable. But I was almost every, like, sometimes 3, sometimes 6, sometimes 8 months, like, having a major setback where I was like in pain for like 2 to 3 months, and was having to do all the things, all the PT, all the chiropractic, and it was just unnerving constantly because it was just hard on my nervous system, and I'm not one to take pain meds, so I was just having to spend a ton of money on all these modalities and turn down jobs and turn down work, and it was just so mentally exhausting. But I found the thing that stabilized my back the most was body art functional training, which is how I got into teaching that. And it's just such a great combination of um, mind body training that and breath work, and I think the emotional element of, if there was any emotional element to holding stress in my body, it was helping me release that too. And it's a workout that was created in Europe but is also big here in New York. And so I became one of their master trainers here after I stabilized from that.
Can you just go into a little bit about what it's like, that type of
Yeah, kind of.
workout? Because I'm, as someone who's had chronic back pain for 10 years, I'm actually really curious to know
Yeah,
more about
yeah.
it.
It's it's kind of a combo of Pilates, yoga, Tai Chi. The cardio is based on martial arts and tribal dance. It's a lot of times when men hear tribal dance, they think it's very feminine, but it's very masculine and um, or feminine. It's just, it's
Yeah,
it's not girly. Is what I'm
I
trying to
hear what you're saying.
say,
Yeah,
quote unquote.
yeah.
So yeah, and it kind of takes you on a journey. So the cardio is only about 12 and a half minutes of the class, and it's just the whole workout is based on the concept of yin and yang. So for every strength movement, there's a release movement, which is really great for the spine, and it's also really stabilizing, which I think was something that my body was lacking with some of these foundational weaknesses or imbalances from the surgeries I had. I would go take dance class, which in and of itself, even though you do a 45-minute warm up before you do the last 45 minutes, which is the dancing part of the class, um, you're you're constantly throwing your body off. Where with um, I needed something a little, like, I didn't like to go just take workout classes. I would lift weights or go run or whatever outside of dance. But this was something that felt as it got me as attuned to my body and my spirit as dance did. But it was way more functional and way more balanced, and really was like the first thing that stabilized my back. So I had like the most, like, kick butt year in like 2013, and after, and because I was able to work for like 15, 16 months straight without any interruptions, and finally, like, my career was going fine before that, but I was always held back by these setbacks. And, like, if anything, if there's ever a resistance to me like getting hired for a job, it was sometimes based on, oh well, she might get hurt, or oh,
Right.
she
Yeah.
couldn't do that other thing. And it was awful to feel that way. It was awful to
Yeah.
feel like I was a liability, or that I couldn't be consistent, because as a person I'm very consistent and I'm very disciplined and reliable. So that was really hard for me during that time.
Just curious to know, just because I come from the world of martial arts, and I think there's a lot of, and having spoken to a few dance people before, there's so many similarities, especially when you do it at a pretty high level and at a high intensity level.
Yeah.
And what I found is exactly what you were saying, is that you're in great shape because of what you practice. But part of that is there's kind of different levels of being healthy, right? And there's different levels of the body being healthy. And what I noticed is that for years, especially when you're younger, so in your 20s, without, if you know, an injury is a different thing, but just the wear and tear that you put on your body. So I was in great shape. I could do all these amazing things with my body. But what I didn't realize was that over time, I was creating some pretty severe imbalances within my body because
Yeah.
of just the nature of the movement and the violence of the movement and the intensity of the movement. The body can just take so much of that.
Hmm.
And if you're not balancing that out, like you're exactly what you were saying with the yin and the yang, if you're not balancing out that intensity with something more foundational, at some point the body's just going to be like, that's it, we're done. I can't do
Yeah.
this anymore. And that's what happened to me. Was
Yeah.
now in my 40s, suddenly all of these imbalances are coming out, and that's a big deal. It's a really big deal. And I'm hoping that at some point there's a way to kind of communicate that to people. Like if you're in your 20s and you feel like you can accomplish anything, remember, you have a future. And
Yeah.
whether you're in dance or you're in martial arts or any sport, really, like you see it in even in football and basketball and all these athletes, that once they hit their 40s, that's when the real problems start to happen.
Totally.
So I'd be curious to know, like, as a dancer, what did you think your trajectory looked like? Because obviously there's an expiration date on the dancing for, and I think
Yeah.
that's it for most athletes. So what did you see your future being?
I thought that, so because during when I was injured, when I was going through my surgeries, I was, um, I'd come to New York for a show and wasn't able to go into the show. And because of the surgeries and stuff, but I wanted to, a friend of mine set me up with an agent and I wanted to stay with the agent. I didn't want to lose my agency. So I was like, okay, well, what else can I do in the industry? So they
Mm.
started sending me out for commercials and print and TV. And I ended up having this whole other career that I didn't plan on having. Um, but through that, I found a niche in fitness modeling. And at the time, it was, I'm not like a high fashion model. I mean, I'm tall-ish, but I'm not 5'11" or 5'10". I'm like 5'7" and a half. Set on my comp card, I was 5'8". But I was lean, but I was, definitely a more muscular type. And at that time, it was like a few of us who were like truly athletes who were doing fitness ads for like Women's Health and the different magazines, and then mostly like fashion models that the magazines, their only concern was like, can these people actually do the moves that we're trying
Yeah.
to do this? Are they strong enough to do it? So like, that was really fun for me. I would go in and they'd be like, ooh, this is so easy. Like, you hit all the moves, you know what we're doing. And for me, I always wanted to, when I started that process, when I was a kid, I thought I was going to have a dance studio when I got older, but I also didn't plan on living in New York City for this long. So but I was planning to make my own workout videos and to create my own workout. And with the fitness modeling, I had been in a ton of beach body videos. They were one of my first fitness video jobs. And I didn't realize they were the biggest fitness video company like in the world at the time, and just rode that ride. They just kept rehiring me for different, like, I think I overall did like over 20, 25
Wow.
shoots with them. And then would, occasionally do smaller video shoots on the side. And so to be working firsthand with some of the top trainers in the world was, really awesome. And just their energy was so magnetic. And they became like family to me. They still are. And um, so that's what I planned on doing. And then when I stumbled upon body art through one of my dance partners from shows I had done, he was like, "You've got to come to my body art class." And I was like, "I can't come because I'm allergic to body paint and I'm gonna break out in a rash. I appreciate you keeping
You're
on being
allergic to what?
to body paint. I thought it was like
Oh,
body
body. Oh,
and so then he was like,
it's like,
no, no.
what?
He was like, no, I want you to come because I know you've been having back issues. And he was somebody that I would be like in and out of jobs with because he was on gigs that I was asked to work on, but I couldn't do because of my back. So he
Right.
knew about my whole story. And, you know, finally working with him, like we talked about, my back issues went away and I finally stabilized. So when I discovered that, I was like, you know what? Like, I would rather spread the message of this than create my own workout at this point. And, I had been asked to do some of my own workout videos for a couple smaller companies, which I did at the time, which was fun. But I just found when I was on the shoots, I was like, I'd rather be background in somebody else's video, support them and get a paycheck from a big company, and more work on a smaller scale behind the scenes and really spread the word on this thing that already exists, that I already believe in, and help them even like, evolve some of the movement and be just a little more involved on. It was like my ego like took the back seat. I'm like, at this point, I would really only be creating my workout to like, do something. It was a little more ego driven at that point. And I was like, that's not the
Yeah.
point. I really want to help people heal their bodies through fitness. And so yeah, that's why I invested in working with body art at the time.
That makes so much sense. And I think as someone, I've also been trying with the video thing and I'm creating a course right now. And sometimes it's tricky because you know what you want to put out into the world, but then all of these questions come up while you're producing it. It's like, is this, first of all, financially, is this going to make sense? Or people are going to want to buy this? But then also I kind of have to take the ego out of it, and I have to look at it. Okay, is this really good, or is it my ego saying there's a problem? Right? Because I'm kind of evaluating myself.
Yeah,
So it's kind of like, and I'm guessing also having gone through so many shoots with this other company to see what's involved, right? I think that
yeah,
also probably gave you kind of a behind the scenes look at what's involved in creating something like this. And that can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. It can also be like, whoa, I don't know if this is the path I want to take,
yeah.
right? If this is exactly, maybe that's not exactly how I thought it worked, or, like, I'm sure you probably had some issues there as well.
Yeah, I really liked working with Beachbody, and actually worked behind the scenes for another company that they own this last year, and helping them create a workout, and then being the person behind the camera who was like counting down for them and like helping with the supplementary um, girls on the shoot, like women on the shoot, keeping everybody in sync. And it was really fun to be behind the camera. But yeah, I was kind of like, I think before I found body art, I was actually up for getting
Yeah.
in on all that was.
Nice.
Um, but and I was totally up for the challenge of creating something. And they were really some of the producers had come to me and said, if you want to create something, bring it to us. Like I felt like I was in such a prime spot to do
Yeah.
this. But then I was like, you know what? It's not my heart right now.
Yeah.
And my heart's in something else, and I need to be true to myself. And regardless of like what money could be or whatever through that other path. um, and I still had all my contacts there and would have a relationship there. So yeah, so that's why I didn't go down that other path or even try to.
That's awesome. And so you got into body art, you started noticing a difference, right?
Hmm.
You started, I'm guessing, hey, I'm not in pain as much anymore, which is
Yeah,
probably
yeah,
the big
and
wake up call. And then from
yeah.
there, what happened next?
So I was not only like having a great career year, but like I was in a show, I was in an off-Broadway show at the time, and I was never in pain from the shows. I was doing fitness shoots that were all like lopsided. A lot of times on a fitness shoot, you do something on your right leg like 20 times, and then you do it on your left once if you even do it on your left at all, and you go home and you feel like garbage. Like I wasn't having any of that, so I was so excited. And then tragically, I was jumped. I was attacked from behind, waiting for the bus by Central Park, and I had to really. I don't know if the guy was trying to steal my phone or what he was trying to do, or if he was trying to drag me into the park. I'll never know, thank God. But I had to really struggle to get free, and luckily the bus came up as I was struggling, but like fighting for my life, just. And I think, and I really like wrenched my neck and my hip, and because I was somewhat compromised from the surgeries I had in the past, even though I was feeling good. Um, I think my body took a bigger hit from that than
Yeah.
it maybe would have otherwise. So that was terrible, and they never caught the person, which so be it. But I ended up going into a really bad chronic pain cycle of like I tore my labrum in my hip with that. I developed a compensation pattern had like pretty bad chronic pain in my opposite knee from the hip, had neck pain, and then just lying around trying to heal the hip was causing more, or rest the hip was causing more neck pain. It was just a really rough time. And I mean, so much to the point that I had to stop working and like go on disability. And that was like it was like a year and a half. And it was actually the year I was getting married. And so we almost postponed our wedding because we were afraid that I wasn't going to be able to stand at the altar for more than like 10 or 15 minutes. And it was really devastating. And that was when I was really going to all sorts of drastic measures, trying all sorts of things I'd never even heard of before to try to heal myself. And after the wedding, I just decided to like just go full out at the wedding. And I'm like, okay, I might be in pain for a couple months after this, but I'm just going to have a good time. It's my wedding day. And I was in so much pain for the month following, pretty much in bed for a month. And then later that year, I kept hearing about the melt method and I thought it was a workout. So I just was like, okay, well, that's great. That's something I'll do when I feel better, but I am not well enough to go do a workout class because it was in a class format, which is, you know, what I was hearing about. And then finally, I reached out to my mentor when I heard about it like 3 times in 1 week. And I'm like, okay, this has to be a sign. And I'm really desperate to get better. And she, I called her and she was like, I was like, do you know anybody who teaches this? And what do you think? And she's like, I actually know the woman who created it. And she kind of owes me a favor because I mentored her when she was creating the brand. So let me make a phone call for you. So she set up an email, like an email connecting me and Sue Hitzman, the woman who created it. And she basically was telling both of us, like, she was making it sound like Sue needed to meet me as much as I needed to meet her. Like she
Yeah,
sold both of us, which
that's
is really
amazing.
sweet.
Yeah.
And was like, you know, Marissa would be a great person for your tribe of instructors. And like, you know, depending on how this goes, but you know, she is really in a place that she really needs help. And Sue is also a manual therapist, and she created the Melt Method as homework to simulate her hands-on body work. So Lisa was like, I know she doesn't have a private practice anymore, but again, I'm calling it a favor. And so Sue and I met, but she was about to go on a book tour, and she invited me to go to this workshop she was having the next day, like the day before she was leaving for the book tour. So I went to the workshop. It was like a 90-minute, it was at the JCC on the Upper West Side of Manhattan at the Jewish Community Center, but they have this huge space. And I didn't know this, but she created her MELT program there and tested it on the population there, which mostly are older adults. And these adults have followed her ever since and have been like, I mean, I'm watching like 90-year-old people get up and down off the floor without assistance who take her
Yeah.
classes regularly. So it's me and, you know, the population of the JCC and maybe a few other younger people. And I'm like, what is this? Like, where am I? And there's all these
What is
roles
going on here?
involved and
Yeah.
what's happening, but I'm desperate. I'm willing to do anything. So I took the class. She was so smart and so engaging as an instructor. And the next morning I woke up and I didn't have pain in my knee and I barely had any pain in my hip. And that's the first time I had felt that way in like a year and a half.
Yeah.
Like to have no pain in my knee. I was like, what on earth? It felt like somebody like
What
took
just
like
happened? Yeah.
a magic fairy dust and put it on my knee.
And that was one workshop.
One workshop.
Yeah.
So I and rewind a little bit. At the end of the workshop, her PR team like zoomed in on me and came over to me and was like, you know, I'd really like for you to like meet Sue and in person, because her and I had talked on the phone and email. And I'd like to talk to you about the possibility of doing a Nightline segment because we need somebody who's had chronic pain, who's never tried melt, who and who isn't afraid to be on camera and sharing a little bit of their life and their story about this. And I was like, ooh, I don't want, I'd played other people on TV. I didn't really want to play myself on TV, but I was, again, I was desperate. I was like, I'll do whatever it takes. So within the day, like within the next 24 hours, like the network Nightline, they were on the phone with me. They did a whole interview with me on the phone. I did a quick interview with Sue's PR firm, and we were set up to do this program because otherwise she wasn't going to be back for 3 months and I wasn't going to be able to work with her until then. And I was like, I cannot take another 3 months of pain. I'll do whatever I need to do. And she had scheduled little times to be back from her book tour to work with this person who was in this segment. So we started working together. She worked with me like she used to work with her private clients, you know, who she still has a handful of them. She just doesn't have an open practice. And we would do a little bit for the segment to show that a little bit of what we were doing. And then we'd really go to work when the cameras left. And she did hands-on body work with me. And then she was teaching me the melt method techniques to do as homework and giving me like some functional repatterning exercises, which is also part of the melt program that a lot of people don't know about. There is a strength part of the program. And within 3 months, I was out of pain. And I wasn't like, I was somewhat stable, but I wasn't like super strong yet. So that was the time where I had to like go back into classes, like go back into my own training. You know, Sue was still working with me, but you know, I worked with one of her colleagues who really works on more of the functional strength and dynamic strength work, which is now part of what I do with my own clients. And within 3 more months, I was back to fitness modeling, doing shoots. The show that I had been in previously was doing like a reunion, like little run of the show. So I got to go back into that and finish out my dance career on my own terms, which was super
That's
exciting.
amazing.
And you know, it was just like everything serendipitously kind of worked out really wonderfully with that. And by like I started working with Sue in January. By May, I was already enrolled in her first course. The show didn't even actually start back up until August. And then I did my second training but in July. So, and then I started teaching melt that September. Like when the show was running, I would like teach it on like other nights. Um, and I just noticed like, you know, yes, I liked teaching fitness classes, and I love I still to this day like body art and melt are my two like favorite things. Um, and I own a retreat company, and those are the two modalities we teach on the retreat. We do body art in the morning, which is the workout, and then we do melt at night, which is the recovery. And it's just been such a unique and beautiful combination to be able to offer our guests. But back to that first season of teaching, I just found that, you know, my classes, I mean, my first few classes, I, you know, maybe had 10 people, like 8 people, 9 people. And then within like a couple weeks, the room was full and people were telling their friends. And this is also when like ClassPass was going on. So Melt's a perfect thing that somebody has no idea what it is. They're like, yeah, I'm on ClassPass. I'll go and try it. And
Yeah.
some of my like long-term students and like clients now are from those early days where they were just, you know, trying things out and figuring out where they wanted to be. And now they're willing to invest whatever they need to really invest in their health and recovery. Because most of my clients are, I mean, I specialize in working with dancers and athletes, but I also have some older clients and people with chronic health issues that, you know, nobody can help them. It's a similar story that, you know, I came from. Like, I have a lot of people like me that come to me, and it's super challenging, but it's also super rewarding to see people, you know, come from such a hard, dark place and then feel hopeful again. Like, oh my gosh, I can actually get into working out. And um, a lot of those people tend to be the athletes, the dancers, the people who were highly functional, and then something happened, or like with you, like wear and tear. And you're like, it's so much harder to unwind wear and tear than it is to unwind like an acute injury.
Yeah. Like I've had, especially these last few months, I missed the acute injuries
Yeah.
because, like, you know, martial arts training, I got hit. Oh, that hit caused this to happen. Then I go see my sports therapist, physio, whatever. That therapist knows exactly what to do. So you're going to do this for the next 4 to 6 weeks, and then the pain goes away, and the body
Yeah.
deals with it in a very kind of linear way. And what I've noticed is the wear and tear stuff, because it's been building for so long, and it comes back a little bit to what you were saying, that the foot caused the hip, which caused the other knee, which caused, there are so many factors involved with compensation that suddenly, like, I'm realizing, like, this back thing that I've been carrying around for 10 years and have figured out how to manage. Well, guess what? That cascaded into a whole bunch of other issues that I'm
Yeah.
now dealing with, or at least that's my theory, because again, there's no thing that I can point at, right? And then you go
Yeah.
see a doctor and the doctor doesn't know, so they send you to another doctor and that doctor doesn't know, and then you end up in this weird kind of place where it's like, all right, I guess I got to do this on my own. And then you know, and
Yeah.
um And yeah, and I think that, but I think also what's amazing about your story, and I'm sure this is something your clients and your students really connect with, is the fact that you're going through it and you've gone through it. And I
Yeah,
think it's so much easier to connect with someone who shares that story than, just because you have the information doesn't mean you understand what that person's going through. But when you do understand what they're going through, it's just a different connection that you're making
yeah,
with your teacher.
for
And so
sure.
I'm sure that a lot of your students really connect with your story as well, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like, especially my private clients, a lot of them end up coming to me because they hear my story,
Yeah.
and because they're like, okay, well, she was able to not just get through it, but she knows the mental and emotional anguish that happens on your way to getting through it, so she can maybe help me with that too.
And how much of that do you think is a factor with a lot of your students and clients, the emotional, the stress? Because as far as melt, maybe we could dive into a little bit about what melt actually is.
Yeah,
We've talked about it, but we haven't really mentioned what you're focusing on with melt. But I'm sure that there is an emotional aspect to it, right? That you have to work
yeah,
through. Because I think a lot of people, and again, something I've started to learn much more about is how fascia and even our muscular system carries stress, right? And what I talk about a lot is the fight or flight response and how our bodies can get stuck in that response, right?
yeah,
You get stuck in your sympathetic response, and the body just holds on to that instead of releasing it, right, in the way it's supposed to. So maybe we could dive into that. So maybe talk to a little bit about what melt is, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about the balance between the physical and the emotional that's involved.
yeah. So it's interesting that you bring up, you use the word like stuck stress, or stress gets stuck, because that's a phrase we use all the time in melt. Like, stress, emotional, physical, mental stress gets stuck in the fascia,
Yeah.
and what might have initially been an emotional thing turns into a physical thing. And I know from myself and most people who have been through chronic pain, when anybody says, "Do you think it's in your head?" or like, there's no worse trigger
Yeah.
than when somebody says that to you, because you're like, I'm not making this
Yeah.
crap up, like I'm not. I'm trying not to curse.
You can curse if you want. You can curse all you
um,
want. It's fine.
um, but like, to have, when that's said, oftentimes it feels like feelings aren't being validated, and
Absolutely.
physical reality is not being validated, and that's really horrible. And it can actually worsen what's already going on in the body. So, what I'll say about that is, like, you know let me talk about the melt method first, and then we'll get to that. So basically, suck stress, accumulated stress from wear and tear, from just walking, living, like sitting at a desk, sitting on an airplane, carrying a bag on one shoulder, carrying a baby on your hip, like, whatever you've been doing repetitively, the body starts to fall into certain patterns. And then you sit at a desk all day, you love Soul Cycle, so you go ride a bike, and then um, you're leaning over picking up your baby, and then you get up and you want to try to go skiing, and suddenly you're like, wait a minute, why did my back seize up? And why? Because you're in this crouch position all the time, and then suddenly you're trying to do something super active that requires an upright, strong posture, and your body starts to break down. So basically, what melt does is it and what happens to the fascia during that is certain areas will tighten up or become dehydrated. When I say that, it does have to do with cellular dehydration, but more so wear and tear combined with cellular dehydration. What that does, certain areas will become super tight, other areas will become more loose, to compensate for those super tight areas. And then we have imbalances that gather because the nervous system fires through the fascia, through the nerve endings, um, and it can't fire as efficiently if the tissue's stuck or dehydrated. So we end up with muscle imbalances. And then we, go skiing and think we hurt our knee. But the reality is that it's all those things leading up to it that
Yeah.
caused the faulty system, which caused what seemed like, oh, I hurt my knee on the slope. But in reality, your knee wasn't, you could have stepped off the curb the wrong way, and it just so happened that you happened to be skiing.
Yeah.
So So with melt, what we do is we use soft rollers and soft balls, soft and hard balls actually, to stimulate the connective tissue. And we do compression techniques. There's some with the balls and the roller. There's some with the roller, we do some rebalancing techniques to balance your nervous system and to also help with breathing. Because a lot of times when people are really stressed out or they're injured or they're in pain, their breathing patterns shorten and get interrupted. So it's trying to create an even, balanced, full diaphragmatic breath through the techniques that Sue created with the rebalancing and breathing techniques. And then there's also lengthening techniques, which are similar, which you use the roller to facilitate that with these techniques. But it's not simple stretching. It's more of like trying to, in a very specific position, lengthening the tissue. And then when you release it, there's like a fill effect. You know, the tissue gets pulled out and then fluid naturally fills in those micro air bubbles in the cells that are created through the length technique. So, so yeah, and you could do this for 10 minutes a day on your own. You could do this in a class. I find a lot of my clients, especially the ones who have the most success that come to classes, they get their own roller and their own supplies for at home, and they'll come and take a class once a week or once every 2 weeks or once a month. And then they're doing maintenance on their own at home, and they're able to pretty much do whatever they want physically and not get injured or not run into problems because they're doing this self-care recovery combined with the strength that they want to do. And I find that's like the sweet spot. Like, and that's oftentimes some people will stop coming to class or stop melting because they're like, "Ooh, I feel good." And it doesn't matter. You can be a healthy person, but like life is just wear and tear. Like, regardless of how you do it, for the most part, unless you're not working, you're not like, you know, you're sitting on a throne somewhere, and even then you're sitting, you know. So
Yeah.
it's so yeah, it's something like people are always like, well, will I have to do it again if I do it once and it works? And I'm like, it's kind of like brushing your teeth. You know, you don't have to do it every day, but
You really should.
yeah, you really should.
You really should.
So yeah, it's and also I find like with my clients and with myself, I feel so good when I do it. I want to keep doing it. And it doesn't take a lot of energy because it's not like a full-on workout. Like
Yeah.
the strength program is exhausting because you're trying to repattern neurological strength pathways. And but you're never going to do like a ton of different exercises in one session. It's more of like you do the recovery work, and then you get the nervous system firing better. You juice up the tissue, and then you add in some strength moves. And that it's a great thing to do before you even work out with the strength, because it gets the stabilizers firing. And then when you go work out, like the right muscles are firing, and then you can get a more dynamic effect and a little more out of your workouts. So
I like what you said about the lengthening aspect of it, where I think that might be a difference between a more advanced mobility type of training like melt is versus conventional stretching,
yeah,
where a more conventional stretching session is extremely temporary in the sense that it may provide some relief for the next hour, hour and a half, you know what I
yeah,
mean? But then because you haven't really retaught the muscle anything, it's just going to go back to wherever it was, you
oh,
know,
it
and
really,
that's something I really started to figure out was that, traditional martial arts is you would do this stretch before working out, which wasn't really the best thing in the world either. And then you would stretch after, but the soreness was still there the next day. Whatever stiffness I had was still there the next day. I never did anything to change my body in a way that would allow me to not have to constantly be dealing with those issues.
yeah,
Um, and I think that whether it's, melt method, or for me, it was really yoga that finally gave me a tool that felt like not only am I providing relief to my pain or my issues, I'm also creating this slow change so that my body can adapt to
mm-hmm.
what those issues are. And the connection to breath, I think that's something that is highly, highly underestimated, is just how powerful proper breathing is when it
Yeah,
comes to just about everything, even strength training, even performance. To be able to take in that much more air on each breath, to understand the connection between the breathing and the movement and the physical aspect of all of that is extremely powerful. And so I'd be curious to understand a little bit more about that part. Like, where does breathing come in? because it's
Yeah.
something that I'm fascinated by and something that I teach quite a bit. I've taught
Yeah.
breath training quite a bit, and meditation has been a huge part of my life. And I'd be curious to know what that connection is with breathing and what other aspects of the physical aspects of what you teach.
Yeah. So, I was going to say, when you were talking about yoga, I think part of the reason why yoga is so effective, and people who aren't as in touch with it and are told to do yoga to become more flexible go into it not really knowing that like they're going to be getting breath training too.
Yeah,
But I
sneaky.
think, yeah,
Yeah.
totally. I think that's why yoga is so effective. I don't think it's just the movement. I think it's the breath combined with the movement, and that's where body art is so effective, because the way we cue people is the breath motivates the movement, not the other way around. And with melt, because it's not a workout, like you're kind of doing separate like compression movements or lengthening movements on the roller, and there's gotta be a lot of specificity. We don't focus on cueing the breath um, in a lot of the movements, but if it's a release technique, or sometimes the lengthening techniques, because the breath will allow the psoas
Yeah.
to relax, or the breath will allow, based on where the diaphragm is sitting or where the pelvis is sitting, will allow the movement to be more effective. Um, and then the big part where breath comes in is our 3D breath breakdown, which is part of the rebalancing sequence, which is where you're literally just lying on the roller. Um, you rock back and forth, and then you tuck and untuck your pelvis, and then you go into this breathing. Um, and just with that little sequence, because the assessments also an extremely important part of melt. You do a rest assess where you're lying on the floor, and it's a self assessment where you can assess your own posture, and the instructor or facilitator will talk you through it. And then you lay back on the floor and you feel the changes you made. And that's not just so we have like instant gratification. That's nice too. But like it's on a cellular level, the body remembers the changes, and by checking back in, not just taking for granted that there was changes made. So, so that's a big part of the breathing with melt. And I was also going to bring up that, um, you know, a lot of times people think like, okay, recovery, fascial rehydration, like improving the tissue, like this is really great for people who are tight, and it definitely is. And working with people who are tight, like melts amazing, and those are always my easiest clients, because
Yeah.
like I'm like, oh yeah, we can do that. That's simple.
Yeah.
But the other nice thing, and this was me going into it, this is my situation, I was hypermobile. So I almost wouldn't go take a yoga class, even though I knew the breathing part was going to be great for me, and like some of the stretching, because when an instructor doesn't really know you that well, and you have some imbalances, like, and then suddenly you can do these moves, or you're pulling your leg behind your head. It's like, ooh, look what she can do. Like, let's help push her into that. And for me, like, I had to kind of rein it back in. And why melt was so effective for me is because it makes the tight areas looser, and then it makes the over stretched areas more elastic. So if you think of the tissue when somebody's hypermobile, like a stretched out rubber band,
Yeah.
and then basically you're just rehydrating the tissue. When there's that stretched out rubber band, there's always going to be some areas that are like extra tight to try to keep the integrity of the
Yeah.
joint and not compromise the body. So, and that's why a lot of people who are hypermobile get injured. Um, so basically, it's like juicing up the tissue to add elasticity to the tissue, which allows for that normal rubber band feeling to come back to the tissue, which is what it did for me. And because I work at Body and Pole in the city, which is an aerial arts studio. I teach at the Institute of American Musical Theater, which is all musical, college age musical theater students. And I have a Melt for Broadway program at Lifetime Sky, when group fitness can happen. And it's open to the Broadway community. um, Most of who I'm getting are hypermobile, so it's like reining them back, getting them to focus on the precision of the lengthening techniques, not so much like, oh, I can bring my leg to my face. Like, I know I've seen you on stage, I know you can do it, but we've got to, like, I mean, even as simple, like, some of the listeners might be able to relate to this, like, a lot of people, whether you're tight or not, you like try to do a split, or you try to do like a stretch, and you notice one side is more flexible than the other. Like what melt has done for me is it's brought like both legs are now equally flexible, which I never thought was going to be possible because I've always been more flexible on my left, growing up and all through my career. So it's like it kind of reins you back in and protects your body so you can go off and do all the things you want to do. Um,
That
yeah,
sounds amazing. Like, I think, yeah. And I think like for me with yoga, um, I was lucky that I was introduced to yoga by a friend of mine who's an amazing yoga teacher, but who very much believed in the balance of flexibility, mobility, but also strength. And I
hmm,
think that sometimes, you know, you just said it, like people start yoga thinking it's to help you be more flexible. And in some ways it is.
yeah,
But for me, it was much more about connecting flexibility with strength and not, I didn't, yes, I would have liked to increase flexibility, but I think sometimes you sacrifice something. Like what you were saying about being hypermobile, that's just as much an issue than it is to be overly tight. Because what happens, and I think, you know, without going too much into this, is that if you have a part of you that's too loose, well, somewhere else has tightened up to compensate,
yeah,
you know. And that's what you find a lot. Like with me, it was from just kicking and kicking and kicking and kicking and kicking and having thrown millions of kicks in the last 20 years. My right hip is permanently turned out. Like it's like if I lie down, my right foot just kind of falls over to the side.
yeah.
And guess what, the body doesn't like that.
Hmm.
You know. And it was funny, you know, I'd see therapists or whatever and like, oh, that's cool, why does your foot do that? Like, I don't know. You know, I don't want it to do that. And now guess what, now it's like, oh, because of this, all these other things are completely out of whack. And oh, how come that must wait, that's not supposed to wait. And that's all I hear every time I go see a therapist. And it's and I think that's it. And I think for anyone who's in it right now, who's dancing, who's doing martial arts, who's, you know, performing at any high level, like start doing these things now.
Yeah,
Start rebalancing now while it's easy. It's so much easier while you're in it, when you're younger, when the body's more capable of change, versus waiting till it's too late. Like, oh, now I'm in pain. Now I'm going to seek out these methods. Now I'm going to seek out these ways of changing my body. But the body's not going to change as quickly or as easily as if you can do it earlier on. I think if I have a message for anyone, that would be
yeah.
it. Right.
Totally. And I really love that nowadays, like there's so much more information out there.
Yeah.
Part of it's social media, part of it's just, it's not like when we were, because we're probably around the same age. It's not like when we were younger that, it was like no pain, no gain, and just push yourself until, you're bloody on the floor and like
Yeah.
essentially figuratively. Um, and now it's like actually applauded to take care of yourself and to focus on self-care and to take a day off and have a rest day and do something good for yourself. And um I'm noticing that with my young like dancer folks, like there's so many of them now. I'm so proud of them that they've committed to this just as much as they've committed to their dance training. And because they're seeing their older castmates or colleagues or teachers who are all like busted and having hip replacements and, when they're not even that old. So yeah, so I get really excited to work with the young people, especially like working at the musical theater school. I'm teaching these like 18, 19, 20-year olds how to not just take care of their body for school, but I'm giving them tools and teaching them about the science behind it. So when they have an audition and the night before their back hurts because they were waiting tables the night before and whatever, and had to, hold a tray like this for way too long, they know what to do to protect themselves going into the audition the next day and how to like release their back or to even themselves out and how to assess what's going on with them in the first place and then know what techniques or movements to do.
Yeah, and I think also something that's underestimated is that yes, you're a dancer, you're a performer, you're a martial artist, you're an athlete, but you're also a human being who
Yeah.
goes through emotional things in life, right? And I feel like that's where suddenly you realize like, oh, maybe this pain that I'm going through has nothing to do with my dancing, but more with this divorce that I'm going through, or with this really stressful thing going on with my family, or the fact that I'm trying to balance school and a job and a dance career or whatever, you know. Like I think we underestimate the toll that how we deal with those emotional situations, that can take a toll as well, right? And I
Absolutely.
think to give people a method that they can use to deal with the physical stress, what often happens as a side effect is you start dealing with your emotional and mental stress at the same time. And it's
Yeah.
like, hey, like I've taught breath training as a performance enhancer to a lot of athletes. And what often happens is they reach out to me and they're like, by the way, those breathing techniques, I've been using them for other reasons. Like when I'm stressed out, I just started using the same breathing techniques. And they're like, this is amazing. Because now I'm not only performing better at my sport, but I'm also dealing with these long time anxiety issues that I've had my whole life. And I finally have a tool that I can use to deal with that as well. So I feel like that's where there's this cool merge of the physical and the mental that comes together when people are awakened to this, not that, like you said, it's not the no pain, no gain approach. It's the, let's try to think of this as a holistic way of life. Your sport is your life. So bring these methods into your life and you'll suddenly see a lot of balance start to happen.
Absolutely. And one of this is kind of a sidebar, but one of the things that is directly affected, I find, by doing melt is your sleep.
Oh, I'm
Like
sure. Yeah.
it heightens your body's restore mechanisms. So when you do it, especially if you do it like in the second half of the day, I mean, anytime, but I notice from people who do it frequently, if they'll do some melt at night, their body, they'll just sleep so much better, which you wake up and you're better prepared to deal with all the emotions
Yeah.
um, and all the things. And I find when like stuck stress starts to leave the body, sometimes the emotions start to percolate and
Yeah.
we're able to be a little more clear and identify what's happening and where things are coming from and able to address things a little bit better.
Yeah, and pain has a toll. It takes a physical toll, it takes a mental toll. Like what we were talking about before about chronic pain and how while you're trying to figure out what's going on, you become stressed about not being able to figure it out. And that's going to feed back into your pain. And it's just this like loop that starts to happen where the emotion causes pain, the pain causes emotion, and then you just
Yeah.
start building on that. And I think that once you figure out a potential solution, all of a sudden there's like this relief of the stress element, which then makes it better for your body to heal. Right. Like I was reading this book about just about healing basically, and how you have to create a healing environment for your body. And when you carry around this mental stress, well, guess what? Your body's not going to be able to go into that healing mode. So you have
Yeah.
to kind of create that space for yourself to heal. The body's amazing in that way, especially with certain things, is that it can heal itself, but you have to create the environment for it to do so. And
Yeah.
as long as you're hanging on to this stress and the cortisol and all of those things coursing through you, body's just like, nope, sorry, I can't do it in this state. You're going to have to give me something else to work with.
Yeah, and I think that applies to what you're talking about with like creating a physical and emotional environment for healing, but also like trying not to judge yourself and trying to, or judge the situation, or
Yeah.
like go to that gloom and doom place. And, especially because some of my health issues and things I've had were so all consuming and were affecting so many different areas of my life. And I think the one bit of advice and the one phrase that's helped me the most is this is a moment in time. This is not forever. This is
Yeah.
what we're dealing with right now. And even if it feels like it's forever, even if it feels like it's never going to end, like telling yourself, this is a moment in time. I can deal with this. Now let's do the things or not do the things that are going to get me there, you know? Um, or not do the things that are going to harm me or be counterproductive to get me there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think it's hard. It's hard when you're going through it. It's hard when you realize like just sometimes you have to dedicate so much time to it that it feels like it's taking away from other things, right? Like I just want to focus on other things in my life. I don't want to have to do all this work. I don't want to have, and I think that's a big part of it. Like my physiotherapist keeps telling me like, you do your homework. Like when I'll go see her and I'll come back and not only have I done what she prescribed, but I went further and I researched and she's like, that's why you're getting results. She's like, most people, I tell them to do something. All they want is they want to come here, lie on my table, have me manipulate a few things, and they don't want to have to do more than that. But that's why they're constantly still in pain because there's just, you can't see your physiotherapist every single day. No one can afford that. Um, but if you don't do the work yourself, then you're not going to find that balance. And I think what you have to do is you have to fall in love with the process.
mm-hmm.
You have to really connect with your movement, with your physical self. And I think that's something a lot of people have a hard time with is
And
that,
also,
yeah.
go ahead. I didn't mean to
No. And I think, well, when you're talking about dancers and you're talking about that, even them, right? Or even when I worked with a lot of professional MMA fighters, I mean, these guys, it's all about the intensity. It's all about the no pain, no gain. but you put so much work into that part of it that you're like, it's like you're too tired to do the mobility work. You're too tired to do the recovery work. You're like, oh, I just want to take a break. And that's the first thing you get rid of, right? It's like you went to all of your classes, you did all your technical work, you did your strength and conditioning, you did everything you're supposed to do. Okay, mobility recovery time. It's like, yeah, no, I'm too tired to do that now. But that's the thing you should be focusing on more, you know? So
Absolutely.
it's yeah, it's tough. It's really tough.
It's a shift in mindset, I think, of
Yeah,
really
absolutely.
realizing how important it is and making it a priority. And what I find is, the people who seem to do the best and the people who I actually see in my class the least, but I see them consistently, are the people who come and do this work when they're feeling good,
Yeah,
not when there's a problem, not when
yeah,
there's a problem creeping in, just because they're like, it's Saturday and I know if I do this twice a month or, once a week or whatever the case is, I'm not going to run into problems. Especially as you get older, like, and when I say older, I'm talking like over 25 or over
yeah,
20. Like, I'm talking if you're a teenager, even if you're like an elite athlete or doing something really physically challenging, marathon runners, like, even if you're doing it as a recreational sport, like, it's still um, so much wear and tear. And like, I when COVID's over, I've hosted like over 10 retreats, but like one of my primary goals when COVID pandemic closed country time is over is to go on a retreat myself, because I don't get to do that very often.
yeah,
And even if I'm feeling good, I still need this retreat. I
yeah,
still like, and it's not because I'm, not doing the work on a regular basis, but I think, there's times in our lives where we just need to kind of pepper in the work. And there's times where we just need to go in and invest like a day or 2 days or a week into real strength and recovery work to keep
yeah,
us going if we're working at an elite level. And if not, it's just the incorporating it here and there will make such a difference. And that's what I love about Melt. It's like, it's not, the effects are cumulative, so you don't have to it's the more you do it, the less you have to do it.
yeah,
So
yeah. And I think that's it. And I think it's you have moments in your life where you'll need to go a little more intensely with it because whatever happens. But it's the maintenance, right?
yeah.
It's doing the work, like you said, when you're feeling good. That's the best time to do it because your body, first of all, will respond to it in a different way,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because emotionally, physically, mentally, you'll be more connected, you'll be more balanced. So, whatever changes you're looking to create, it'll be just that much easier to do,
Yeah.
right? And then it's like a car, right? If you have a car and you never get the oil changed and you never do all the things you're supposed to do to maintain that car, well, guess what? It's going to break down a hell of a lot faster than if you do all the little things. And it's not a big deal. You just got to remember every, whether it's once a week, twice a week, do the work. Do that little bit of work, which is going to allow you to do things for a much longer period of time.
Yeah.
Like my experience with yoga, what I keep saying, especially these days, is yoga is the thing I do that allows me to do everything else.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that's probably a similar idea with Melt, which is, do that little bit of work periodically when you need it so that all those other things that you do, you can do them better and for a longer period of time. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I totally
Yeah.
agree.
Awesome. Well, Marissa, thank you so much for taking the time. I think there was
Yeah.
so much good stuff here. So how can people connect with you? How can people learn more about what you're doing, learn more about Melt, learn more about body art? I'd love to give
So
people resources.
yeah, so my website is marisamerliss.com. It's MarisaMerliss.com. And then on Instagram, I'm at MarissaFit 5678, and that's MarissaFit 5678. And yeah, I can be reached through either of those places.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much for taking the time again. And I look forward to connecting soon.
All right. You too. Take care.